Okay, hey, welcome back. This is chapter two, and we're here with my blurry background and everything else, and we're going to talk about the early early globalization, right? What's the So last time we talked about the Native American tribes and the fact that or the indigenous people of the New World, and we talked a little bit about the situations in Europe and Africa. But when we really look at this, what's going to be the change once Columbus comes over, right? And so, what's going to be the change? The first thing that's going to come about, the first thing that's going to change, is that Spain is going to become incredibly wealthy. Spain is the obviously is the country that sponsored Christopher Columbus's voyage to the New World, and they're going to set up colonies, and these colonies are going to profit in gold and silver. In unbelievable amounts of money compared to what Europe was used to making, right? And so basically everybody in Spain uh, becomes involved in this colonization effort in some way or another. And so the Spanish are going to start to spend thousands and thousands of Spanish men to the New World, looking to gain gold, looking to gain wealth, looking to spread their Christian beliefs and Catholicism, and looking to gain personal glory. And so, of course, these are going to be the conquistadors, and we could do a whole. I mean, we could probably do a whole class about the different Spanish conquistadors and their conquests and their journeys and what they do. But we're just going to touch on one, and the main one is going to be Hernan Cortez. Right, Cortez is going to come over to the New World about, I don't know, 30 years after Columbus, and he's going to be the conquistador that topples the Aztecs. What's so impressive about this, or what's so intriguing, I suppose, not even necessarily impressive, is that Cortez is able to conquer the most sophisticated civilization in the New World with under 100 troops and a couple horses, right? And why is he able to do that? Well, number one, he's going to make allies with the Aztecs' neighbors, right? And the Aztecs, again, practice a daily human sacrifice. They take POWs from their neighbors, and they sacrifice them to the Aztec gods to make sure the sun comes up in the morning and goes down at night. But then also there's this there's a silent killer that the Europeans bring with them, and that is the disease. And so by the time Cortez shows up, disease has already been rampant in the New World for the last 20, 30 years, and it's spread, and populations are dwindling. And so the populations of the Native American people are very diminished, right? Hernando de Soto is going to be another of the conquistadors that's going to do this. He's going to spread disease. He goes looking for gold, and he travels into Florida and Georgia, the Carolinas, um, Arkansas, those places. And probably the most important thing about DeSoto, he doesn't find any gold in North America. It's just not there. But what he does is he spreads those diseases to the natives that he does encounter, and then those natives again, they spread the disease to the other natives that they come in contact with. And so by the time like the Pilgrims and the settlers at Jamestown arrive, the Native American population of North America is just decimated. I mean, it's almost wiped out. I mean, it's very, very, very it's a fraction of what it was before, right? Coronado is the guy that's probably most important to us at Barton Community College or in Kansas, and the fact that he goes looking for Quivira, which is supposed to be one of these golden cities made out of gold. He goes up through Arizona. He finds the Grand Canyon. He travels across what's going to become the Santa Fe Trail, comes into Kansas, comes all the way up into Lyons, Kansas, maybe up to like Lewisburg, Salina area, and again, spreads disease everywhere he goes. And so the largest impact that these Spaniards are going to have is that they're going to introduce those diseases. And you can see here on this chart over to the left, just the drop in population, by, I don't know, 1520, you're looking at a population, a native population of in Mexico of about 22 million. By 1550, 20, 30 years later, a little bit later, you're looking at 2 to 4 million. So you're losing somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 million people within 30, 40 years, within a generation of people that are just going to die because of exposure to um, the flu and smallpox and yellow fever, right? So that's going on in the New World. What's going on in Europe during this time frame? Well, at the same time that Spain is exploring and bringing in all this gold and wealth, we're going to see a huge change in Europe, right? From 500, like we talked last time, from the fall of the Roman Empire till really 1500, the Catholic Church is really the only unifying force in Europe, right? It controls learning, it controls money, it controls the kings, it controls power, right? And because of this power, because of the Black Death and the lack of numbers or whatever, there's a lot of corruption within the Catholic Church, right? And so early reformers come about in the 1300s, 1400s, and they try to bring about a change into the Catholic Church. They try to basically hold the church more accountable, right? They want to do that by making the language more available to the people, right? The official language of the church is in Latin, and the vast majority of people don't speak Latin. They don't read Latin. I mean, up until Charlemagne, like maybe 1 or 2% of Europe was literate. Even after the Charlemagne Renaissance, you only have like maybe 10% of people that are literate. And after the actual Renaissance, more and more people become literate, and they start to write in their own native languages, right? And so we do this, and there's a call for that, and there's a call to end just the corrupt practices of the church. And oftentimes, when you do that, there's examples like Jan Hus was a Bohemian priest in what's now the Czech Republic, right, in Prague, and he starts doing mass in the native language, and it upsets the church, and he has some beliefs that don't necessarily coincide with the current pope, and they ask Jan Hus to come and visit, and when he does, he gets arrested and burned at the stake, right? And he gets eliminated for his beliefs. And then along comes Martin Luther. And so in 1517, Martin Luther, who's up on the screen there, is going to have I don't know, going to have a religious epiphany, right? And he sees a pope, or he sees a priest out selling indulgences, um, and he's concerned with the corruption of the church, and he writes down all of his ideas, all of his gripes about the church, the 95 Theses. He writes it in Latin. He nails it on the church door, right? And basically what happens is Luther, he says, look, selling indulgences to poor people that can't afford them is immoral. We shouldn't only teach in Latin. There's situations where the Pope is not always right. He believes in this idea of salvation through faith and works. Like, you can't just have no, I'm sorry. Martin Luther believes that faith is the only way through salvation, that you can't work your way into heaven, right? So the Catholic belief is that you have faith and works. Martin Luther says, look, you just faith is what you need. And so the church basically kind of invites Luther to one of these sit down meetings, and Luther refuses to go, and he continues to spread his ideas, right? And so Luther goes into hiding because the church is out to kill him, and he uses this new invention called the movable type printing press. The printing press has been around for, I don't know, about 20 years, a little under 20 years at this point. Johann Gutenberg had taken the design of a wooden type printing press from China and improved upon it, and creates this the modern version of the printing press, right? And so all of a sudden, Martin Luther doesn't have to go out and handwrite letters to people, or deliver speeches to spread ideas. He can sit back the castle of one of the German kings, or one of the kings from the Holy Roman Empire, one of the princes, and be safe and spread his message. And so his his message starts to take off, right? And his message starts to take off, not necessarily because of people are like upset with the or like the princes or the higher up, the nobles are upset with the church, but because they see that they can make a lot of money if Luther wants to create a new religion. And so instead of sending 10% of everything to Rome, all of a sudden the German Holy Roman Empire can keep some things. Keep 10% of everything back home, and that adds up pretty quickly, right? So Luther gets kicked out of the church, and he decides he's going to start his own church. He starts the Protestant church, translates the Bible into German, gets rid of the idea of indulgences, allows priests to get married, and his ideas are going to spread throughout Europe. You're going to have what's known as the Protestant Reformation, which is going to divide Europe between Protestants, which is this idea of protesting the power of the Pope, and the Catholic Church, right? And so you're going to have a series of religious wars that break out. And in a world history class, we spend a lot more time with this, but like there's religious strife, right? And you're like, well, Lindstrom, what does this have to do with the American colonies? And to be honest, the Reformation itself has very little to do with the American colonies, other than the fact that we're going to have mostly going to be settled by Protestants. Well, how do we get to the fact that we are settled by Protestants? And that's going to become because of this guy. His name is Henry VIII, and Henry VIII is an interesting figure in history. I think he's more interesting than he really is important. Like his story's kind of fascinating because everybody knows Henry VIII has, he has 6 wives. He has a bunch of wives, right? But he's also this movement away from Catholicism in England. And so what's interesting is when Martin Luther breaks away from the Catholic Church, and Northern Germany and the Scandinavian countries adopt Protestantism, Henry VIII comes to the throne, and he is a devout Catholic, and he stops Protestantism from coming to England, right? In fact, he's actually given an award for being a defender of the faith, of the Catholic faith. However, Henry has this problem, and his problem is that he needs a son. And Henry, interestingly enough, Henry was never supposed to be king. His brother was actually king. And his brother was married to a Spanish princess. And remember, we talked about Ferdinand and Catherine of Aragon. No, Isabella, I'm sorry, Isabella and Ferdinand. Well, their daughter is Catherine, and she marries Henry's brother, right? And they're married, and they don't ever have a child. And then Henry's brother gets sick and dies, and Henry becomes the king. And it's the practice of that time that if the queen and the king had not conceived an heir or a child, and the king dies and someone else takes the throne and they're unmarried, then that person that just took the throne would marry the setting queen. And so Henry does that. He marries a Princess Catherine of Aragon, and they have a problem. She's a little bit older than Henry, and they keep trying to have a baby, and and she has some miscarriages, and just there's problems. And then eventually she gives birth to a daughter. And Henry is just like, well, what am I going to do? Right. So Henry and Catherine, they have this daughter. They name her Mary because, again, they're good Catholics, right? But marriage in the late 1400s, early 1500s is not like marriage today, or maybe it is like marriage for kings today. I don't know what it's like to be a king, so I can't tell you, but the kings would typically have mistresses, right? And so one of Henry's mistresses is a lady by the name of Anne Boleyn. And her father is one of Henry's advisors. And Henry's like, hey, your queen is getting a little bit old. She's probably not going to bear you any more children, but I have this young daughter, Anne, that you really like. And, I can see that Anne's going to possibly, give birth to, lots and lots of male babies, only male babies in our family, right? And so Henry's advisor talks him into divorcing his wife, or trying to divorce his wife, under the grounds that Henry found out that scandalous his brother and his wife slept together while they were married. And so Henry asked the Pope for an annulment of his first marriage, and and so he can marry his mistress. The problem for Henry is that Pope Clement VII was being held prisoner by Catherine's nephew, and now Catherine is part of that Spanish royal family that not only rule Spain, but they also rule the Holy Roman Empire, right? And so basically think of like modern day Germany and whatnot. And so the Pope is being held prisoner by the Holy Roman Empire. I'm sorry, the Holy Roman Emperor / Empire over some trivial dispute. And Henry contacts the Pope and he asks for permission to divorce this guy's aunt. Well, I don't know how close Catherine and her nephew are, but I do know that, like, if I was holding the Pope captive and my uncle asked for permission to divorce my aunt, and the Pope said yes, well, then that might put me over the edge, and I might, separate the Pope's head from his shoulders. And so the Pope, being very fond of having his head on his shoulders, refuses the request. And so Henry's beside himself. He doesn't necessarily know what to do. And so he looks around and he's like, oh, hey, I got an idea. I just saw Martin Luther over there in Germany, or the Holy Roman Empire, decide to start his own church. And so Henry decides, hey, I'm going to start my own church. And he walks down to the local Catholic church and he gets a sign that says, Church of the Holy Cross. And he gets some paint and a sign. He says, Church of England. And he slaps it up there on top of the Catholic Church sign. And so he starts his own church. He makes himself the head of the church. He keeps most of the religious stuff the same, but he grants himself a divorce, and he seizes all of the lands of the Catholic Church that they held in England, and he gives that to all the nobles to make them happy, right? It doesn't necessarily make everybody happy, but for our purposes of our story, they will. And so Henry marries Anne Boleyn, and they get married. They have a daughter. Henry's upset. He accuses Anne of adultery and sleeping with her brother, and he kills her, has her executed. Then Henry marries for a third time. He has a son with this one, Jane Seymour. Little Ed, and everybody's really happy except for Henry, because Jane gets sick and she dies. And then Henry goes on a spree of marrying 3 women in relatively short succession. The first one is Anne of Cleves, and he meets her, and this is a classic case of the king getting catfished. He saw a painting of Anne of Cleves, and he's like, ooh, I want that. And she shows up, and she doesn't look like the picture. And so he divorces her, which sounds cruel, but compared to the other queens that are going to come, that's a pretty good outcome for her. Catherine Howard marries the king next. Henry's like in his mid to late 40s, and I think Catherine Howard is like 18 at that time. And dudes that are 46, 47, they just want to sit around and, watch Fox News at night and yell at TV. And Anne wants to go out and party, and Henry wants to go to bed at 9:30, and Catherine's upset. And so I said Anne, but I meant Catherine. Catherine wants to go out to party. And so anyways, Catherine ends up fooling around on the king. And when you fool around on the king, you get your head separated from your shoulders, and she gets killed. And then he marries Catherine Parr in his golden age, and he dies, and Catherine Parr survives. And so Henry has 6 wives. The first one is divorced. The second one is beheaded, and the third one dies. The fourth one is divorced. The fifth one is beheaded, and the sixth one survives. And so we have that. All right. And so that's this movement of religion in England. And you'd be like, oh, hey, we're probably done. We know we've gone from being Catholic to being the Church of England, which is Anglican. And so all of a sudden we're going to be good. Well, all of a sudden Edward takes the throne, I think when he is like 7, really young. And so he has other people telling him what to do. And he converts the entire country to Protestantism. And nobody's happy with that, because Anglicanism and Catholicism, they're like, I mean, they're cousins, right? It's just the Pope and a lot of other, minor religious stuff. But Protestantism is a whole new change, right? And so everybody's upset. Everybody has to go to a new church. And Edward dies when he's 15. Natural causes, not a scandal, but he dies. And his sister Mary then takes over, right? And if you remember back, Mary is the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. and she's a devout Catholic. And so she reverts everybody back to the Catholicism, which is a big jump because if you're a Protestant and then you go to Catholicism, you're like, whoa, this is a big move, right? And she has everybody that revolts against her killed, right? And so she gets the nickname of being called Bloody Mary because she kills so many people. Interesting side note is that Mary marries her cousin, who is Philip II from Spain. And Philip II saw himself as the defender of Catholicism throughout Europe, and we'll come to him in just a second. But anyways, Mary rules for a short period of time, and then she dies. And then Mary's sister Elizabeth takes over, and Elizabeth reverts everybody back to Anglicanism. She's much more religiously moderate, and she oversees this high period of English culture, which is called the Elizabethan period. You're going to see Shakespeare during this time frame. You're going to see England grow into this colonial, at least begin to grow into a colonial power. We're going to put a whole bunch more resources into sea, to boats and those types of things. And so we have that. So when we're really looking at this period of American this early period of American or early period of English colonism in America. It's during this rule of Elizabeth, right? Under Elizabeth, you're going to see the majority of England is relatively happy with Elizabeth, right? They call her the good Queen Bess. Like she's married to England. She's devoted to her people, but you're going to have extremes on both ends. You can't make everybody happy if you're king. And so you're going to have Catholics that are devoted to becoming Catholic, and you're going to have this extreme Protestantism that's trying to stamp out all signs of Catholicism. And they want the strict super religion based on the Bible, right? And this is where you're going to see the birth of the Puritans. And the Puritans we're probably most familiar with are going to be the Pilgrims that come over and settle Plymouth. Just put that in the back of your head just for a moment. So Elizabeth takes over this waffling back and forth between Protestantism and Catholicism, and Anglicanism comes to an end, and you have some small extreme groups. All right. While this is happening, Spain is becoming filthy rich, right? And Spain sees itself as the king of the world and the defender of Catholicism. And Philip II was he was wed to Elizabeth's sister. And so when his sister dies, Philip thinks that he's going to marry Elizabeth, and Elizabeth scorns him. She says, "No, I'm not going to marry you." And not only is she not going to marry Philip II, Elizabeth starts to fund some of Spain's enemies. Spain used to hold the Netherlands, right? And the Dutch, the Belgium, and those areas, right? And so England starts to give money to what's going to be known as the Dutch Rebellion, right? The Holland, right? And this angers Philip, right? And then Elizabeth sets up a bunch of privateers, and privateers are basically just pirates that steal from other governments, but they're sponsored by other governments. And so England begins to sponsor privateers that steal money from Spanish ships. And the most famous of these privateers is Sir Francis Drake, who may or may not have had romantic relationship with Elizabeth. And so if you're Philip II, right, here you were married, your sister-in-law, she won't marry you after your wife dies. Then she starts giving money to your enemies in Europe, people that are revolting against your rule. And then she starts running around with a guy that's stealing money out of your colonies or stealing boats, stealing from you on the open seas. That's going to upset you. And so Philip II puts together something called the Spanish Armada, right? It's 130 ships, 30,000 men, and we're going to sail over to England and we're going to show England what's up. But the Armada ports in France to gather troops that had marched down from the Netherlands and from Holland, right? And the English decide that they're going to attack this armada. They light a bunch of boats on fire and they sail them into the French harbors. And some of those boats hit some of the Spanish boats, and they cause mass confusion. And the Spanish boats come flying out of the harbor, and the British are there with their long cannons and they attack the Spanish as they come out, and they sink a bunch of the boats. And some of the Spanish boats, they sail through the English Channel up into the North Sea, and they get caught in this, they get caught in the storm and they get sank. And the whole story of this is that the Spanish Armada is really the end of the Spanish dominance, the end of the Spanish dominance in the New World, right? It's a major setback. Spain begins to focus more on, you know, working with working to ensure that Catholicism stays in Europe, and not so much they kind of leave England alone. It's like once England gets free to set up their own colonies and then get out from underneath the Spanish thumb, we're going to see lots of different changes, right? In 1479, England begins to explore the New World. They're looking for something called the Northwest Passageway. Um, you know, they never find it, but what they do find is they find that they can, there's lots of land, there's lots of timber, there's lots of fish. And really the thing that's probably most attractive to England during this time frame is the lumber in North America. And then eventually we're going to figure out that we can grow tobacco, and you can grow this leaf and you can smoke it and it makes your head feel all funny, right? The first attempt at a settlement comes about after Elizabeth's death, and that's going to happen on Roanoke, right? 117 people settle there. They don't bring the necessary supplies. They have to sail a group back to England to get stuff. By the time they get back to Roanoke Island in modern day North Carolina, those people are gone, and it's just the vanishing colony of Roanoke. The first successful colony in England in the New World is going to be Jamestown. It's founded in 1607, right? And it's founded as a joint stock company, right? And what this basically means is that there's businesses in England that are funding this colony, funding the settlement, and it's believed these guys are going to come over there and just to find silver and gold just laying on the ground everywhere. Ultimately, they don't, but what they do find is that they can grow things like corn and tobacco, and that they could take tobacco and they can send it back to England, and people will pay money for it, right? And it takes them a couple of years to figure all that out, but it does. Jamestown is made up traditionally of men that come over. They're typically firstborn, or I'm sorry, not firstborn, second, thirdborn nobles that come to the New World looking for their own fame and fortune, because back in Europe, the firstborn was going to inherit the wealth and the title and the land, right? So they're looking to set out and make it on their own. England is also going to colonize other places like Bermuda and Barbados, and those types of places. And England doesn't necessarily find gold or silver in different areas, but they find tobacco and rice and sugar in there. Of course, we see in our picture, we see Bermuda shorts, which, goes to show you why England shouldn't colonize anybody. All right. After Elizabeth's death, you have James the First, who's going to take the throne, and then Charles the First is going to take the throne. And you're going to see a lot of religious persecution during this time frame. Charles is going to try to revert England back to Catholicism, and we're going to have some issues under Charles the First. The Puritans are going to be the subject of that persecution, right? And so they choose to flee the country. They flew the country. They come over in 1620, and they found Plymouth, right? These are the Pilgrims. They're going to come over on the Mayflower. They're supposed to go to Virginia. They get blown off course. They end up in New England, and they sign the Mayflower Compact. That is the first example of self-government in the New World, right? And so you see differences, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in chapter 3, but you're going to see these differences between like Jamestown and Plymouth, and the fact that, or the Massachusetts, New England settlements, is in the fact that Jamestown is there to make money, and ultimately Plymouth and New England is there as a religious settlement, right? The French are also going to come over. The French are going to settle in Canada, typically single dudes looking to trap fur. They typically have good relationships with the Native Americans because the Native Americans are looking to trade their commodities, which are fur or pelts, right? And so they're going to focus on that fur trade. They're going to ship money and fur back to England or back to Europe and make different amounts of money. The Dutch are also going to come over during this time frame. They're going to have a small colony in New York that's going to trade hands multiple times between the English and the Dutch. But the Dutch, again, are going to focus on fur trade. We have that. The Spanish are going to settle in, modern day Mexico after Cortez takes control of the Aztecs. They're gonna colonize much of the Caribbean, right? One of the differences between the English and the French and the Spanish in terms of settlement are that in Spain, in Spanish and French colonies, the king of the country owns all the land, right? And so you could work and settle and you could make profit off the land, but ultimately the king owned that land. And so what you would get in these colonies is you would get single dudes that were coming over to try to make money in the New World, and then they would return back to Europe to elevate their status. In the English settlements, the land is sold to individuals. The land was typically granted either from the government to individual companies to pay off loans or to individuals to pay off loans. And then those individuals would further subdivide the land and sell it to individuals. And so when you own a chunk of land, regardless of where it is, and you're going to go live on that land, typically you're going to settle there and you're going to make a new life there. And so you're more inclined to bring your family with you. And so in the English settlements, individuals own the land. And when you do that, you bring your wife, men and women that are married and love each other very much. They'll hold hands and close their eyes, and poof, they'll have more babies. They'll have babies, right? And so the population of the English settlements begin to rise dramatically. The populations of the Spanish and the French colonies really don't keep pace. And so that's going to become important when we start to look at fighting for control of the New World, which will come, right? The economic system that's developed during this time frame for these colonies is called mercantilism. It's kind of important to excuse me, to wrap your head around it. Mercantilism is basically this. The colonies are used to provide raw materials for the mother country, right? And so in the example of the American colonies, tobacco is grown in Jamestown. Tobacco would then be grown and processed and loaded onto ships and sent back to England, right? And so then that tobacco is packaged or whatever in England and then shipped back to the Americas and sold in Massachusetts for profit of the English company. And so instead of just taking a product from Virginia to Massachusetts and selling it, which would be cheaper for the buyer, and probably even more profitable for the seller would have to sell it to an English company that would ship it back to England, pay a smaller price, and then the English tobacco company would sell it in America, right? This is going to happen to all goods that are produced in these colonies. You have raw materials that are going to go to the mother country, and the mother country is going to turn those into consumer goods and ship them back. The best case scenario for the mother country is the colonies would pay for these goods in gold and silver, which would increase the hard specie wealth of these parent countries. But that's where we are. And so all outside trade is forbidden. The French and the English, although they're living right next to each other, aren't going to trade in large quantities in the New World, right? The main items that are going to be sold in Europe during this time frame to Europe are going to be like tobacco and fur, and then sugar and rum. The sugar is, of course, is probably the main commodity that's going to come over because before the discovery of the New World, sugar is super expensive. And then after the New World, sugar gets to the point where almost everybody can start to consume sugar. It's a drug, man. People love it. And so they do that. Rum is basically just one of the liquid forms of sugar. You put a little alcohol in there and people will drink it all day long, right? And so you have that. Finally, to end our thing, we're going to talk about the Columbian Exchange. And this is the idea, this is the exchange of ideas and products and people between Europe, America, and Africa. We have this triangle of trade between the old world and the new world. It's named after Columbus. Columbus was never actually part of it because he's dead by the time we actually start to move large quantities of things. America is going to send things back to the new world, like tobacco and sugar and chocolate and corn and spices, right? And the big one that's going to come across, obviously, sugar and tobacco are going to fuel a huge amount of the economic prosperity that's going to happen in Europe during this time frame. But probably the thing that's going to have the largest impact is going to be corn. Corn's going to come over to Europe. They're going to start to grow corn, and all of a sudden, corn is a very calorie dense vegetable. And so you can use corn in all kinds of different things, and you can increase your diet, increase your calories in your diet. It's going to lead to an increase in life expectancy in Europe, which is going to disproportionately cause a population explosion. And it's not the fact, I don't know if that's the right word, disproportionate, but the population explosion isn't the fact that people are having more babies. It's the fact that these babies are living longer. People are living longer into adulthood because of calories. And so it's going to change life expectancies. Europe is going to send large animals and protein sources to the Americas, pigs and horses and cows and chickens. And then Europe is ultimately going to send guns and money into Africa. And then Africa is going to supply slaves and culture to America, unwilling labor to America, right? The other thing that's going to come back and forth, which we've talked about a lot, is disease. You're going to have syphilis is going to come out of the United States and land in Europe and Africa. Malaria and yellow fever are going to come over. Smallpox are going to come over to the New World, and the native populations aren't going to have immunities built up to those. All right, so I think that is the end of chapter 2. You guys have any questions, reach out to me, and I look forward to seeing you in chapter 3. Bye-bye.